So my role today is to introduce you to our guest speaker, McLoughlin. It's easy to label people. On the one hand, we could label Megan as being given only weeks to live 11 years ago, that she's an organ transplant recipient twice. She's blind and she has cancer. Actually, 2 types of cancer diagnosed in the past 12 months. On the other hand, we can label Megan as the current Australian of the Year, SA local hero, the founder of Herd of Hope, raising awareness of organ donation, a mother of 2, and one of only 64 women in the world to have given birth to 2 children after having 2 organ transplants. She's also a champion horse rider and someone with a really great sense of humour. But if there was one label we could give Megan today, it's a leader. Resilience, vision and hope, all in the face of adversity. Megan is a special and unique person. How did she do it? How can we all do it too? Please welcome Megan today to share with us her story, her inspirations and what makes her so strong. Thank you, Megan.
I'm able to play that. Is that yeah. It's pretty simple. I live in the Barossa. I just drink. No, I'm joking. Sorry. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you everyone for welcoming me today. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story worth listening to. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity for you to listen to mine today. Now, I grew up like any regular young child in the country in South Australia. That's my dad and I. We're doing a boar run, checking all the water for cattle. 1974 called They Want Their Moustache Back. As a young child, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 8, which ordinarily would have set most people back. And as the doctors told my parents Megan wouldn't be able to do X, Y and Z, I couldn't see why I couldn't. So at the age of 12, I rode 300 kilometres on my 2 horses, Fanta and Tara, from Melrose in the Flinders Ranges to Adelaide to raise awareness for diabetes. In 1994, we raised $25,000 from it. It's an amazing achievement. Then, when I was about 26, after I'd gone overseas and had got a full equine scholarship to study in the United States, I returned home. With my whole life ahead of me, at 26, I presented at a hospital with a terrible headache, to which they discovered the pressure in my left eye had reached 86. I was rushed in for laser treatment, and unfortunately, they over-lasered my eyes. I had 8,000 hits of laser in the one sitting, where you're supposed to have about 3,000 over a 6-month period. Within 3 days, I was diagnosed as legally blind. Now, thinking that might set me back, I returned to my parents' farm and every day would do little chores. I'd go for a walk. I'd try and find my horse in the paddock. Proved very hard when your father moves your horse from the paddock and you have to ring him. Thank God for technology. 3 months later, I was diagnosed as being in acute renal failure. I don't know if anyone in the room knows much about renal failure, but you can lose up to 90% of your renal failure before there's any changes to your health. And the next thing I knew, I was from 63% of renal kidney function to 7%. So I started dialysis. In November 2010, the doctors on a visit had told me that I had weeks to live. My heart wasn't handling dialysis. My blood pressure had dropped to 80/30, and they told me to get my affairs in order. I wouldn't be seeing Christmas. Then on the 20th of December 2010, being legally blind, my phone used to chant or tell me who was ringing. And my phone at 9:07 a.m. starts saying, Sydney kidney, Sydney kidney. To which I answered, thinking something must have been wrong with my bloods. Paul Robinson, my transplant coordinator, says, "Megan, how would you like some organs for Christmas?" I had moved myself to Sydney in time and in hope of getting this transplant. I had this huge fear, being legally blind, of missing my flight. I had an hour to get to the hospital. Someone from Perth was unable to get across to Westmead in time. And because I was there and available, I went in for my transplant. Now, 3 days before that, I didn't think much of it. I thought Christmas is going to come and go, I may not make it, but that's okay. I can't explain to everybody in this room what it's like to receive that phone call. For 3 seconds, you're just amazed you've got a second chance. And then your heart sinks. You realise the reality of another family out there. They're having to say goodbye. They're having to let go of hope in order to save your own life. Now, roughly about a month later, after my transplant and I'd recovered, I said to a friend of mine, Tim, "I just want to go on a date, just a date. Find me someone." He said, "Oh, Megsy, I know this bloke that knows this bloke that works in IT." And I said, "Oh, Tim, honestly." He said, "Well, you said you were desperate." And with that, he passed me my now husband's email address. We were married in 2013, and as Heidi touched on, I'm one of 64 women in the world that has had 2 children post-double transplant. We were the first baby born in South Australia to a double transplant recipient, and my son Sam, who is now 4 years old, is the most successful baby born to a double transplant recipient in the world. We're not going to tell him that he's a world record holder just yet. Very soon after, probably a little bit soon for the doctor's liking, my daughter Ella joined us. Now, for anyone in the room that ever has the opportunity to meet Ella, Ella was coming into the world when she was good and ready, and we had no saying in it whatsoever. Slowly and surely after all this has happened, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. When I was pregnant with Ella, at 30 weeks, they had scheduled a surgery for me. Unfortunately, it was just too risky to the child. So every 3 months, for the last 3 years, I fly to Sydney to have those cells removed. Unfortunately, it did progress to my right ovary, and as of last Thursday, it's now moved to my left ovary. But I keep going. The alternative is much worse. I've had 2 skin cancers removed from my lip, and as we touched on before, I had to go to Canberra, an amazing opportunity for an Australian of the Year awards. I had to reschedule my surgery, and I'm so thankful that I got to meet Dr. Harry Harris. I'm petrified of surgeries, so I hit him up at the lunch at Parliament House on what I should ask my anaesthetist in regards to my surgery. To which he responded, for any of you in the room that have ever met him, "If I hear you have to have a general, I'm going to think you're a pansy." To which, when I had my surgery, it was unfortunate, as Adelaide is so small, that the anaesthetist actually knew him. And I said, "Oh, Harry said I'm not allowed to do this." And he said, "Oh, he's a good bloke, but let's knock you out." So we faced these adversities. And from these adversities, I realised very early there was little to no services available to regional people post-transplant. I met with so many transplant recipients over the years, some of them which had said to me, "I've gone out to the shed, I've loaded a gun, I'm done." If you understand the medication that we take on a daily basis, steroids, so prednisolone, that is directly related to depression. And the survivor guilt is just sometimes far too great. Why were we saved? Why did we get this gift? And as my journey progressed, I met more and more people on the donor family side. So donor families are people that have said yes to organ donation. 47% of Australians who don't know their loved one's wishes say no. So if you look at the statistic in 2010, that there was 310 organ donors the year I received my transplant. Last year there was 554. Australia is heading in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go, considering there was 76,000 deaths in total in hospitals last year. Less than 1% became an organ donor. Now, society sees me as broken, as Heidi clearly pointed out, and I'm actually happy to wear that label. But when you look at it and see the amazing things that happens with organ donation, I thought, why can't the double transplant blind girl change things? So I set up a charity called the Herd of Hope. And what better way to launch a charity than to take 40 head of Pole Hereford cattle onto Australia's most iconic beach, Bondi? Why not? We'd originally looked at setting our sights on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but unfortunately, with a change of Premier in New South Wales, that we were unable to do it. And after a 2-hour meeting with the current road minister, she said it was just far too much of an inconvenience for the 45-minute closure. As we're leaving this meeting, we get a phone call from the Mayor of Bondi, who said, "Bugger the bridge, bring your cows to Bondi." To which I always love the quote, "How you react in defeat speaks louder than how you are in success." So on the 17th of March, we took 40 head of cattle onto Bondi. We had 3,000 people at 7 a.m. in the morning. We had every channel on TV cover the story. And that was where, and the reason I'm standing before you today. One of the ladies at Bondi, who I'd never met, saw, in a moment that I saw as my greatest weakness, I broke down and started crying on the beach. In a minute's silence, we dedicated to donors. She saw as my greatest strength and nominated me for an Australian of the Year award. Now, I met Sandy for the first time in May this year, and I'm very, very honoured to tell you all today that a week ago she became one of my board members for my charity. She's a go-getter. Amazing what things can come when you listen to someone's story. So from Bondi, we realised that there was a great need. 1 in 3 transplant recipients are regionally based. 1 in 4 donors are also regionally based. And there's no mental health services provided. So through Professor Ian Olver and Dr. Kate Gunn at the University of South Australia, we conducted an Australian first. We like to do Australian firsts. A study on the mental health journey of a transplant recipient regionally based. But we extended that to their carer. Because how often do we walk into the room and look at the patient and go, "How are you?" How often do you look across to the chair and say to that person, "And how the bloody hell are you going?" We know that the success of that transplant recipient is based on their support network around them. We've also held, for the first time in Australian history, a camp for children affected by organ donation. So in August this year, we took 10 children that had lost someone significant in their life to a camp at Undoolia Station in the Northern Territory. No easy feat. We also had their parent accompany them to hope that they built their own little herds, which we exceeded our expectations from this first camp, which I don't think many people can say. They were so happy to meet someone. The biggest thing we did was a technology ban. We took all their phones off them. And they thanked us. On the last day, in all their reviews, they said, "Thank you for taking my phone off me. I haven't communicated with people before and like this." we'd achieved something. Now, 6 weeks on, they're still all in contact with each other. And we are hoping to hold another camp like this in the next months to come. I did receive a very happy phone call last night from the Northern Territory, who are in drought, from Andy Hayes, who's the brother of Ben Hayes, who donated the cattle for Bondi. 2 things came out of this conversation. One, he told me he sent me 15 heifers, Drought Master heifers, to join my herd. And second of all, he was doing some sort of rain dance because they'd received 11 mil. He was a very happy man. The reason my charity has survived is because of In Kind. We moved cattle 4,700 kilometres around Australia, and it cost me nothing. Rusty Crane from Narracourt in South Australia, when I had to bring the cattle back from New South Wales, I rang him a month after he brought them back and said, "Mate, you haven't sent me the invoice." He said, "I'm not charging you." I said, "You've got to." He said, "No, my 14-year-old daughter has cystic fibrosis, and one day she may need a transplant." Some of the most significant people I've met on my journey was a young boy by the name of Nathan Gremo. At 13, he was being bullied, and as a result of lashing out, he had got detention the night before. As his mum dropped him off to cross the road as she took his 2 sisters to netball practice, he miscalculated a car and was accidentally hit. Now, the reason I tell you this story was if you ever find yourself doubting that there are good people in the world, think of the Gremos. When they're trying to grieve the loss of their son, the staff at the hospital came to them and said, "We've got a recipient for Nathan's liver." They said, "Great, it's a newborn baby. Fantastic. The baby can't get here for another day." So the Gremos kept their son on life support to make sure another family got to take their little baby home from hospital. At the moment, my charity is working with a young girl, Elsie, who's 3, who lives in Rhinee. Dear little Elsie needs a kidney transplant. She's been on dialysis since she was 12 months old. Last 2 weeks ago, unfortunately, her heart valve has failed and she needs a heart valve replaced before she can have a transplant. And just this week, her mum has called me right in the middle of when their family's shearing and she's got 3 other sick kids to inform me that Elsie's just had a seizure and is paralysed on the right-hand side of her body. Now, that's the journey that a transplant recipient goes through. And that is why I encourage all people to register as an organ donor. We're not wishing any ill health on you. We don't want that. By God, you as a whole have lived what we are hoping not to go through. But if I can make a difference and make sure that that family gets to take little Elsie home, what more could I achieve? So yes, society, tell me I'm broken, that's fine. But I'd prefer to give myself a label that I much prefer, which is unique. If we can be unique, we're true to ourselves, we've done a good job. And remember that everybody out there has got a story to tell. If you take the time and listen. So I ask you today to please consider my charity. We can't always revolve around the in-kind donations we get. We're not always going to get rain in Alice Springs. But one thing I hope you take away is that life is worth living. I would not change a thing about my life. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. I wouldn't be the mum of a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old full of life. The only thing I hope is that my donor family in years to come realise that they weren't giving up on hope. They were passing it on to me to carry through the rest of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Have we got any questions? We've got a few minutes for questions and answers, please. Peter, Neil, over.
I have prizes.
Oh,
for wine.
okay.
Sorry.
Peter, Neil.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Megan. That was fantastic and inspirational, as we expected. On the issue of organ donations, Australia has an opt-out situation, whereas people like Spain have an opt-in. Sorry, the other way around. And Spain is far more successful in allowing organs to be harvested, for want of a better word. What do we need to do to get Australia to change so that we can overcome that issue of people not knowing and therefore family in grief saying no?
I think it's about education and re-education. Australians, as we know, we think about tomorrow. Oh, it'll come. It doesn't matter. We'll think about it tomorrow. The one thing that amazes me about Spain is they don't have dialysis machines. Their organ donation rate is so high that people don't need to go onto dialysis. In Australia, we currently have over 14,000 people. But the problem is, like I've said today, unless it affects you, you don't know anything about it. And I can stand here and be quite arrogant in saying I've got cancer, that's great. The services provided to me for that, amazing. For organ donation, nothing. So we need to really focus on the fact that we need to educate. If it was your son or daughter, grandchild that needed that transplant, would you accept it from a stranger? Of course you would. So why wouldn't you give back if the circumstances were different? I don't know if I agree in the opt-in, opt-out, because if a person opt out, that's it. There's no option ever again. And I think with Australians, we may find people will opt out just out of spite, or we're not going to let the government tell us what to do. What we've got to do is get people to talk and go, well, actually, that's the reality for a lot of people. So, yeah.
Okay, another question for you.
I remember some years ago we had an opportunity to put on our driver's licence that you're a willing organ donor. Is that still valid? And has there been any change in that? And also, is there an age limit at which organs are not acceptable?
So South Australia is the only state still that it is on your driver's licence. Unfortunately, it doesn't count. So your family gets the decision. They make the decision, which I do not disagree with. I think that's the right thing to do. So what we need to do is get people to go onto the donatelife.gov.au website and register as an organ donor, basically. Tell your family you've done it. That's the only key component that I can really send home with you. Oh, God. That's me riding my horse, just letting you know. My husband filmed that. He's not a horse person, so that's as close as he was getting.
Should we play it?
Yeah, you can. I competed for the first time last year after 14 years of not competing. And I'd paid a substantial amount of money for my horse, so don't tell my husband or my dad. And yeah, I started competing again. So you can hear in the video my brother, I rode past him, past the gate, and I said, can you just tell me when I've gone over the finishing line? He's like, are you joking? I said, no, I can't see it. And he goes, are you sure this is a good idea? And I said, yeah. So at the end of it, you can hear him yelling, pull up, pull up, pull up. So anyway, you don't have to play that. So thank you. The licence unfortunately just is null and void. We're the only state that still does it. So please have the conversation with your family. So that's one of my questions. So Deb, you now have to give this gentleman the bottle of wine. There is actually no age limit in Australia. So as probably most of you in here can back me up, I've seen fitter 70-year-old than 30-year-olds. There's no age limit on being an organ donor. And the reason I can back that up is what I think is the most successful transplant in the world is the kidney is actually currently 137 years old. A mum had donated her daughter a kidney. So modern medicine is an amazing thing.
Phil, you've won a bottle of wine.
Okay. Okay, first, you mentioned the taking away the phones. We do the same thing at Ryla. Although I had to be the keeper with 30 phones in my room. Everybody wanted it, but nobody got it. One practical question. How on earth do you get 40 cattle onto Bondi Beach?
You don't tell the council you're blind?
Okay. I mean, as in like, physically, I mean, it's a beach. It's like pretty tall. It's like you just kind of got them through Sydney? I mean, this is
well,
like...
what we did, we used a trucking company called Hayters, and if anyone's been to Bondi, it's a curve, a walkway. So what we did, we closed the walkway, and this poor bugger had to back his cattle truck with a pig trailer. I don't know if you know anything about trucks, but about 400 metres on a curve, and he backed it up like a pro. We held the cattle there for about 10 minutes, but 2 days before the event, my dad works in movies, so he does cattle. It's my daughter. So basically, what we did was, Dad's done movies. He knew how to handle cattle. He did Light Horseman, We're the Never Never. He's got it sorted. And we're down on the beach 2 days before the event, and we're down there with the council. And one of the ladies said to me, it's going to be 23 degrees tomorrow. Do you think the cows would prefer to walk on 2 legs than 4? To which my father lost it and walked off across the flat kicking sand. And I've answered and said, it's actually physically impossible for the cattle to walk on 2 legs. They'll be fine. Their hooves are designed to withhold temperatures over 70 degrees. It'll be okay. She said, that's good to know. So that was sort of what we were dealing with on that regard. I also had to write a 27-page report on cow poo. So 2 weeks before the event, we weren't allowed to feed the cattle nuts in case they pooed on the beach and someone rolled in it and went into anaphylactic shock. To which common sense isn't common anymore. To which I don't know if there's any cattle farmers in the paddock, in the room, but I love sitting around peeling pistachio nuts for my cows. So. But it was more of an education. And then when my dad had calmed down and stopped kicking sand and came back, he said, these people need this, don't they? I said, yeah, they do. Yep. So basically, there's a lot of paperwork. They won't ever let cows on that beach again. You might have to find another one, but it was an amazing opportunity, and we're very thankful for what they did say. So.
Okay, have you got some questions?
Yeah. I have, even though one of my questions was stolen, I do have a couple of questions, if that's okay, for the room, and we have a couple of caps to give out, which Deb will take because I'm banned from throwing them, apparently, from the last incident we had. We don't talk about. So, yeah, okay, you good to go? Don't throw them. Okay. Just a quick question. Does anyone know what the most demanded organ is at the moment in Australia for a transplant? Someone else can see the hands, can't they? Because I can't. Yeah.
Anybody know?
Yeah. So last year there were 1,756 organ transplants performed. 897 of them were kidneys. So unfortunately, with the way technology goes and modern medicine, we haven't developed it with heart transplants, and the liver is actually a really hard organ to donate because of the function it does, and the health of the liver as well. If you're an organ donor, how many people can you save with that decision?
30, 12.
Count your organs.
2. We've got more than 2, Rob.
It's between 7 and 9.
Who's the, what's the...
Yeah.
Oh, it's 8.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike
So,
Stevens. Well,
there you go.
we've got, yeah.
8.
8, Mike. Yeah.
But if you're a tissue donor, which is very rare, you can save up to 400 people's lives. So we all know Truria Pitt's story with the burns she received. They had to actually fly in skin grafts from overseas because we don't donate tissue in Australia. And that's also corneas, different tissue parts. And if anyone is a bit grotesque by medical services, you don't even know where the skin graft has come from. It's like a shaving. You can't see any difference on the body. So don't think that the person's going to look unwell. One more question. Have we got one more hat? Two more hats. Righto. Have we got time?
Got time for one more hat.
Okay, one more hat. I don't know now. Who's the best jeweller in the room? Dave! I have to tell you a story about Dave. So I got my rings from Dave quickly, and he knew I was legally blind. He saw me down the street one day and he said, "Are you right?" I must have looked like I was drunk, so... Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Oh, well done.
Yeah,
thank you. All right, we're going to give you a little presentation. Okay. Thank you so much, Megan, and you were just, just absolutely amazing, wonderful.
My husband works in IT and that went to...
Okay, it was, she just wanted to apologise because her husband works in IT and, that's why the IT didn't work. So it went fine, Megan. That's a really good idea to have it running continuously, actually. I just also want to acknowledge that in the room today we have Jan Shawley, who's the CEO of the Australia Day Council, and they manage the Australian of the Year Awards here in South Australia. So really lovely to have you here, Jan, and to also... the awards are open for nominations for 2020 at the moment, aren't they? So if anybody... Megan is the current Australian of the Year local hero, and no doubt we'll always remember you, Megan. Dr. Harry, who's he? I think Megan McLoughlin. Yeah. I just want to before we thank you, I just want to say this little tweet came up today on my Twitter from today's quote from the Dalai Lama, and I just wanted to read it out to you. If you are motivated by a wish to help on the basis of kindness, compassion and respect, then you can do any kind of work, in any field, and function more efficiently and more effectively with less fear or worry, not being afraid what others think or whether you will ultimately reach your goal. And I think when that came up today, I thought I just had to read that out to Megan, a true leader. Megan, in recognition of your talk today, we would like to present you with this certificate to acknowledge that a donation has been made in your name to help in the eradication of polio in the world. So thank you, and can everybody please stand and thank Megan? Okay.